Welcome to Soulfire Wisdom with Kate Olson. As an evolving spirit and change adventure navigator, it is Kate's mission to empower and guide you on your path and inspire your truest passions. She will encourage you to share your gifts, speak your truth, and ignite your inner wisdom and purpose. She hopes to do so with a little humor and grace and her own soulfire passion. Kate talks with amazing guests who have embraced the pursuit and are fanning the flames of their own passion, purpose, and soulfire wisdom. Now here's your host, Kate.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Soulfire Wisdom. And usually it's totally awesome, try something new and talk about it Tuesday. And we're kind of staying on that theme, but I'm going to talk about something I tried about 6 weeks ago and talked about. I tried GEM supplements. They're whole food supplements. And when I talked about them before, I had only been taking them for about a week. So I told you I would get back to you on how they work. And I've been taking them for about 6 weeks now. And I will say I can tell a difference. I think that they're helping with my digestion as well as, I think they're probably providing the nutrients that I need because I feel good and I have a lot of energy. So I wanted to get back and tell you that, yes, I think the GEM whole food supplements work pretty well, and I discovered that I like the peppermint flavor best. So we have a great show planned for today. My guest is Sandra Vesterstein. And Sandra is the lead instructor and founder of the Thrive Learning Collective. Her teaching style is from the heart. She skillfully guides people to build their competency. Sandra says, "For many years, I described myself as a racehorse stuck at the gate. I had all the energy and ambition driving me forward, but the two seemed to struggle to work together in a way that would allow my dreams to come true. Truth be told, there was probably a part of me that believed I wasn't worthy of success. At a very young age, I learned to run the pattern of being an excellent support person to other people who wanted to achieve success. I would forego my wants and desires to make other people happy, or so I thought." Sandra credits NLP with changing the course of her life. It was through a series of events and realizations that Sandra was guided to take a deeper look at NLP and finally to become an NLP certification trainer with Bennett Stellar University that she found herself, her strength, and her path. It was training and teaching with Michael Bennett, the founder of Bennett Stellar University, Sandra's mentor and eventually her life partner, that Sandra evolved into her current mission. After Michael's passing in 2018, she was guided to her own mission as CEO of Thrive Learning Collective, which offers NLP, hypnotherapy, life coaching, a Reiki certification, as well as personal development courses with the mission of guiding people to transform while nurturing the spirit, mind, body connection. So I actually met Sandra in 2015 when I'll have to say Sandra's also an excellent salesperson. She talked me into coming down to Sedona after the Seattle class was canceled, and staying down there for 3 weeks to become certified as a life coach, hypnotherapist, and NLP practitioner. And she and Michael were the teachers for that course. So that is where I first became connected with Sandra, and I'd like to introduce her now. How are you?
Good. Thanks, Kate, for having me. I can't believe it's been since 2015.
Yeah,
How does time fly, right?
long
I don't think I sold you so much. I think I was the admissions counselor that w- connected you to your what you really wanted to do and develop your skills. And if that's selling, I guess maybe I am good at selling. I don't know.
Oh, you're a good salesperson. That isn't a bad thing.
Oh.
So, among many other skills. So, before we get started, can you tell people a little bit more about yourself and what brought you to your current path? Just a little
I
background.
think, as you read in my bio, that, I've always had a passion to help people, to guide people to, be their best. And, I struggled with anxiety pretty much my entire life. I didn't really know it was anxiety until I got older and, went to counseling and that kind of, did that kind of work to attempt to overcome it, and I just never did. And it happened that I ended up having a concussion, and it really ratcheted up my anxiety to the point that it was incapacitating. I just remember one day going, "What happened to me?" Because no one had talked to me about what the symptoms of a concussion can be, and one of which is anxiety and depression. So, anyways, through different things that happened in my life, I got connected through to NLP because of that. And I didn't really understand why I was being guided to do an NLP course. And in that course, I didn't really get rid of my anxiety and depression.
Mm-hmm.
But it gave me, I'll never forget walking down the street after that course. And it was a week-long course at the time. And I came home, and one of my girlfriends came up to me and she's like, "Oh my God, where have you been?" And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And she goes, "You just look so relaxed." Well, then kind of like a little light bulb went off, and it's like slowly taking off these layers. And then I did some more training, and that's where we got a hold of the anxiety, realizing that anxiety was really a program of the past of my childhood. With a teacher that I had an interaction with the teacher that had called me a stupid idiot in front of the class. And so anytime I was faced with being in public or speaking to two or more people, I was anxious. So I had a lot of social anxiety. So we cracked the case on that. And I always say that NLP gave me my life back. It was like for the first time in my life that I could actually live, and I didn't feel this heavy weight of anxiety. And so then it became my specialty. People started coming to me for anxiety. And I always say usually the first session they have a whole different understanding of anxiety, and after that, with our continued work, maybe up to 6 sessions, that anxiety is totally gone. I mean, anxiety is useful when it's useful, like a tiger's chasing us, but most of the time it's not. So that's how I got into it, and then I just loved it so much I became a trainer, and probably was the best decision I ever made in my entire life.
Yes.
So,
So, first of all, you work with people to help them overcome grief. When and how did you get started doing that?
well, with the training in NLP, there is a process called the grief process. And, as I started to work as a practitioner, I've been a coach for over 20 years, and I've had NLP training since 2008. I started to notice a lot of time what was underneath people's sadness was unresolved grief. And the more I kind of uncovered it, the more I realized, oh my gosh, if we got a hold of that grief file and cleaned it out, then they would be much more open to going forward in life. And so grief is really about the fear of not having those good feelings in the future. And so once we started doing that, I just noticed the more I uncovered that, people moved a lot faster through the processes. And a lot of people don't know this, and it is proven to be true through all the people that I've worked with grief, is when we have a loss, whether it's a job, it's a person, it's a pet, it's a relationship, I imagine it that we have this little folder in our brain, and we slide that into the folder, that experience. Mm-hmm. And we have an invitation through grief to process the grief, or we can just kind of stuff it in that folder. So when we stuff it in the folder, it doesn't go away. It just, every time we experience a new grief, it activates that whole, it opens up the folder, and people can't figure out why they're so overwhelmed with grief. It's because a lot of times they haven't grieved the previous one.
Yeah.
So yeah, that I have found to be very interesting. And so when you go to the initial grief that they have not completed and resolve that, all the other grief seems to kind of, kind of like resolve itself in a way.
Yes, that's actually during our training in 2015, part of what we did is when we did timeline, we worked with other people.
Yeah.
And it turned out that the person that I was working with on timeline was dealing with grief. Mm-hmm. And, I could help her to a certain extent, but it was beyond what I could do as a beginning person. And that's how I, discovered that Sandra had a kind of a special connection to this. Is she took over and helped the woman that I had been working with she was kind of a little bit stuck in.
Right.
Yeah.
You truly can get stuck in grief. You
Yeah.
can get stuck.
So why do people have such a hard time and sometimes get stuck?
Well, we have one of our sisters in our, graduating in the school at Bennett Stellar of Rhonda Lepresti, who does Peacefully Prepared. And we've had many, many talks about this. And it's a lot of times I think it's because we're kind of a grief phobic society. We push grief away. And well, let's face it, a lot of our feelings we're afraid to have. What do they say? There's like 4,000 feelings, and we typically wear anywhere from like 5 to 10 of them, experience 5 to 10 of them in a day. And they're the same 5 to 10 that we experienced the day before. So we get really kind of locked into just doing these certain emotions. And then when grief comes up, we're not equipped to handle it. And if our parents or people who are close to us aren't comfortable with it, what's the first thing that people do when someone cries? They go rush in and they got to hug them. And really, that's just a release. I'm not saying that you can't ever hug somebody, but me as a practitioner, and I know you know this too, Kate, it's like, it's okay to have an emotion. It's okay to release it. And I think that having this training has allowed us to kind of hold a space for people to release that pain. And so I think partly it has to do with being grief phobic. Another part of it is, I don't even think people understand what grief is, and so when it knocks on their door, they're like, oh my God. I mean, I remember when my dad was dying, I remember making a conscious decision, like, I want to show up and really be my best self with him. And I want to have this experience so that I don't have regret. And I had a conscious awareness of it, but not everybody has that. And not everybody, we were just talking about a friend of ours that lost a child, and it was tragically and, with no notice. And so, kind of planted that seed of like, how do we do this? And I guess I've had experiences with relationships that I didn't fully grieve that came back and got me. And so I just kind of, I've had a soft spot in my heart for people when they are grieving, to really guide them to be able to embrace the learnings for themselves and incorporate them, taking it from the intellect to the heart, and then really allowing them to let it go and just holding that space so they can do that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think grief does scare a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, in the introduction, I mentioned that grief can sometimes be paralyzing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it certainly can be. I mean, I look at you were talking about Michael, and as Michael found out that he had cancer, I was his primary person, and he was. This is another thing about grief because when we talk about grief, everybody refers to the 5 stages of grief. Dr. Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, and what they don't realize is that work was based on the dying. It was not based on their surviving. And so she worked with people like, what were the stages of a dying person, and it's always seemed to me when I read about that, it always seems so linear. And I don't think it is linear, especially for the survivors. And as I walked with Michael through his death process, it definitely wasn't linear. I mean, he was all over the place, and I was all over the place. And I did a lot of pre-grieving. And because we were in the public eye, and he didn't want to share that, that was just a whole nother layer of grief, right? And so then when I ended up having to share that with people, and I had to deal with all sorts of different emotions from other people, and I just realized that I had a choice at that particular moment for myself. I could have easily gotten stuck in grief. And I just had to say, you know what? I am going to befriend it. I'm going to welcome it. And I'm going to give myself as much time as I need to have. And so there were some people that would say to me, well, I don't get it. You say that you miss him, and then maybe a little, 2 months later, I'm angry that he left me, because that's grief. There is no cookie cutter way in it, And so I think for me, having that experience and talking about it and being open about it gives other people the permission to actually welcome grief. And grief can stay it can stay with you as long as you welcome it. And it can leave. It's like sometimes I think when people get stuck in grief, it's like having a bad house guest that never leaves. You're like, come on, really? You're still here? And that's because we're just not processing that. That's why we get stuck in it. And it's, I believe it's due to fear. We're afraid that once we feel it, we're not going to get out of those feelings. And that's just simply not true. I think it's the resistance of grief that keeps grief stuck within us.
Yeah. So why is it important to go through that process and then move on to another level?
Well, I think because, if it's like for anything, I always think of it like the visual I get is like, so when we have grief that we haven't processed, there's like a part of our heart that's locked, that's not capable of connecting. And because when we're grieving and we're in that stuck emotion, we're really running fear because it's fear of not being able to have that in the future. And so, do you want to connect with people on a fear-based model, or do you want to connect on a love base? So I think it's really important to be able to process that and then let those, because fear, we call it being stuck, but I think it's another word that could be for that would be anger. Like people get stuck in the anger of being left behind, or maybe something happened tragically, abruptly, or maybe it wasn't the perfect death. Maybe the person you're grieving you didn't have that romantic goodbye, or maybe you lost a job and you feel like you got the short end of the stick. But that anger just seeds in your body, and it makes you unavailable to connect then.
Yeah, I've also heard people express that, they feel like they have to keep expressing how important that person was to them. And the way that they know how to do that is through grief. So if they let go of that, then they're in some way betraying that relationship.
Right. Well, and this is really interesting that you're saying this. We had one student come in, this was in Florida, that it wasn't a student actually, it was somebody, a friend of a student's, and she had this edema and she could not get rid of it. And Michael was actually working with her, and the edema was about, that's how she connected with a loved one that had passed on. And if she let go of the edema in her leg, that would mean that she wasn't connected. So giving her different ways of connecting, like you were saying about grieving and being sad about the person versus you can grieve and you can actually go through it and be connected by remembering all the wonderful times and keep them alive. Like that's how I keep Michael alive. I tell stories of Michael and me in class. And, they say that, you keep alive until that last person says your name, speaks your name. And so the more I can keep Michael's memory alive and I can honor him, the more it actually helps me too.
Yes. So do you think people can truly get over loss, or?
I do. I do. I think it's that not only they can, I think it is so important too, because it is such an invitation to grow and evolve as a person. I mean, I remember when people would say to me, what was your biggest gift through all of this with Michael? And I said, I think my biggest gift upon reflecting on grief was to love somebody just to love them and not to have to get love back. I mean, what if I wasn't present to that whole grief process? I may not have ever really embraced that beautiful lesson that I got to experience that love. And I wouldn't have been able to do it if I was afraid to process it.
Yeah. So what is that the thing that surprised you most about grief, or what was that surprised you most?
I think what surprised me most about grief actually were people's reaction to my grief. I mean, it was how uncomfortable it made people to grieve in front of them, and I think people are conditioned that they have to make it better.
Yeah,
No one
they
had to
want.
make it better for me. It was the weirdest. I would kind of be like taken off guard, like, oh, huh. But I had a different comfort level because I have been around grief. I've worked with people with grief, so I had a little bit different comfort level. So I guess I was more shocked on how people were so structured on grief, and that it had to look a certain way. And it's like, well, gosh, for as many people as there are and experiences, that's as many people the ways to grieve. I'll never forget when I went to the Bandler certification just after Michael had died to redo my license or upgrade my license or whatever it was called. And I remember talking to Dr. Bandler, and I said, when are the images going to go away? Because it was so fresh. And he didn't try to make it better for me. He didn't want to say, hey, do you want to do a grief process? And he said, they will go away when the images finally flip. And he was right. The images, finally flipped, that I wasn't seeing a sick person anymore. I was remembering the fun times. They finally flipped, and it took a while, but so I had that experience where somebody would just hold the space for me to say, it's gonna be okay. And then other experiences, like if I were to be sad, it was like, oh, what are we gonna do? She's sad.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
actually nothing.
And they can't make it better because you need to be in that place.
Yes, exactly.
So, was there a lesson in the experience of going through that grief, or?
Was there a lesson? I mean, I think one of the lessons is learning that, I have the ability to love, just to really just love. One big lesson is take the, how everybody goes, I want to have unconditional love. Well, take the condition out of that. So you just want love. You don't want unconditional love. You want love. So that was something. And also, for me, I was really thankful of the education that we have, and that I was able to allow Michael to have his process of death and not put my map of the world on him. Because of course, would I have liked to have other people with me and to be going through this with me? But he was a very private man. And for me to actually have had that ability to hold that space for him and even take the flack from some people. Some people weren't happy with that. But, I had that wherewithal to say, well, wait a minute. I think everybody should be able to choose how they die. And this was his choice. My job was to hold that space for him.
Yeah.
So that was a good lesson, and not everybody's going to like you for that. And I didn't do it to be liked. So I just I found that I was much stronger than I thought I was. Way stronger than I thought I was. And to be able to like they talk about, sometimes there's a person that's the guardian of someone who's passing, that they control the gates. I had to do all of those roles. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I think that was a big lesson, that I didn't really see myself as that strong, and being able to hold that space for somebody. Especially for somebody that you love, that you don't want to die.
Yeah. But I see that. I see that Michael was very, he wanted to do things Michael's way.
Yeah. Right. And he died that way too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, well, loss leaves us with, with sadness and empty space, really. Yeah. And we'll always feel that. And you mentioned gifts before. Are there gifts, or sometimes it can be just acknowledgments that you gain through the process?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I just know, even, so going through this COVID, there's a lot of loss.
Yes.
And, for people to be able to articulate it, sometimes people just need to say it. Like, I'm scared because I'm grieving the life that I had. And to realize I'm no longer going to have that life anymore. It's gone. Some people have lost their jobs. Some people they're being faced with, oh my God, I thought I was doing what I love to do, and I'm realizing I didn't really even like it. They're having all this stuff. And for me, I've had this whole, people calling me and just wanting me to hold that space for them it's not that they have to solve anything, but really just become aware of what is, so that they can move forward. And I think it's made me a much better coach. Instead of rushing in and putting my cape on and, attempting to solve something, just to kind of so geez, what's that all about? And what's that experience like for you? And so I think there's that level of acceptance and discernment that I have as a coach, that kind of like I got some seasoning through all of this. Like, I became more seasoned through it. Yeah. And I know that people are going to get over it. I don't think that, like, I think of my father, I was super close to him, and I think of all the wonderful things. Every once in a while, I'll feel that little tug in my heart that, oh, I wish I could call him, or whatever. But for the most part, it's really like, I'm just so blessed that I had such a great father and a great mother, and think of all those really positive things. So I think as time goes on, you can replace that emptiness. You have to be willing to do it, though. You have to be willing to let something else fill that space in. So
yes, that's very true. So, is it healthy, or it is healthy, to stay connected when you're going through a loss and to maintain connections to move forward? Um, but a lot of times people want to isolate when they're going through grief. So, what I guess what would you tell people with regard to that? Or
Well, I think there's a balance. I mean, I think there is some times that we have to go within. I did a lot of, when I had that feeling of wanting to pull back, I did a lot of journaling during that time. You know, they say it takes a lot of executive functions to write. And so when we journal about things, we kind of like take some of the emotion out of it. And so I did a lot of that. I will say, when you're grieving, at least from my experience, there could be some mind reading going on for others, like, oh, they won't want to be around me because I'm not happy right now, or people don't want to talk to me about this because they feel uncomfortable. But if I really flipped that around, it was, I didn't want to be around people and I felt uncomfortable. And
yeah,
so I think it's really important to have that insight. Like, I had to kind of stop myself and say, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Is that really a truthful statement? Do you know for a fact they don't want to be around you? And I was like, well, no. Then I would allow myself to kind of connect. But I do think there's like it's like an ebb and flow. There's a balance between that, because we do need to go within and process the information, process the loss, and then trust that this too shall pass, and then we can go forward. But I think it can be really easy to slip into that depression. It can be really easy, and I think for those of us who are with people that are grieving, to know that. And so, not to be pushy, but really, to check in, of how people are doing. A lot of times people would say to me, I didn't want to bother you.
mm-hmm.
Well, how is checking in on me bothering me? you know? So there's kind of like mind reading on both sides. So whether you're a survivor and you're grieving, or you're a support person with a grieving person, stop the mind read. Just ask, well, how can I support you? What do you need from me? Maybe you don't need anything. What would be the best use of my time with you, so that you could get, and sometimes, it, quite honestly, for people, sometimes they just want you to be in their presence, and they don't even want to talk. They just want somebody
Yeah,
to be around.
yeah. So, if you know someone is dying, which you did go through that process, are there things that you can do to make the grief process easier?
Yeah, because there's some, especially when someone's dying, there's some pre-grieving.
Yeah.
You pre-grieve. I think it's really about taking a step back and checking in with yourself, and really honoring what you're going through, because it is sad, and you could have anger, you could have frustration. I remember taking care of my dad when he was really sick. There was some frustrating times. There was times where I was like, oh my God, because there was like nothing you could do that was right, because
Mm-hmm.
they're sick, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And so, like, really taking a step back and saying, am I kind of just being overly sensitive about this? Having an outlet, having a close friend or a counselor or somebody that you can process these feelings with. Because sometimes people just have to hear their own voice say something, and then it just kind of dissipates.
Yes.
I think doing mindful practices, meditation, all that kind of stuff is really, really important. Self-care, 100%.
Yes. 'Cause
Self-care.
I'm sure you experienced this with Michael. As aware as Michael was, I'm sure that he went through a whole range of emotions from,
Yep.
like being angry and being uh, unreasonable. And, then at other times being compassionate and thoughtful.
Mhm.
And a person who is dying, just like you, has, this range of emotions that they're dealing with, because,
Mhm.
it's something is going to happen, and yet you don't want it to happen.
That's right. And some people, not everybody, it's like, let's take the romance out of death. Not everybody's ready to die. Not everybody wants to die. And so you, as the support person, you can be the brunt of a lot of that. There were many times that I would go into the bathroom in the hospital, cry my eyes out, and come back and, be present. It's not that he meant to. It's just that I was the closest person to him. And yeah, and then also realizing, what I notice in the family dynamics, and this has got across the board with even people that I work with, people take other people's grief so personally. So say that you and I were a family member, and our father dies, and I talk about something that really was upsetting to me about dad, and then you get all torqued off at me because I'm upset about dad instead of holding a space for me. And I see that a lot. Like, people take things so personally, and really, we know memory is subjective. So my memory about a person and your memory about a person could be totally different. And they're both not even real. We think they're real. And so I just think, to be able to not get so defensive and not take things so personally, and really just like, that's interesting. You had that experience. What was that like for you?
Yeah.
You know?
And I think I mentioned to you before that the summer before Michael died, when he was in Seattle doing that class, a lot of the things he said made me feel like he knew he was going to die.
Yeah.
And at that time, he was saying these things that, they would have been very, like preparing someone for grief, understanding that this process. But I think that when he was facing it, that probably changed to some degree.
Yeah, because that's when he wasn't really diagnosed then. There was a
Yes.
symptom. But
Yeah,
they
and
say
he
that
still had hope then.
yeah, and they say instinctually we all, especially when it comes to that type of a illness, that we do have a knowing. We have a knowing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so watching someone being fearful of that, and yet, you want to hold hope for them. It's like that hope, and I feel sorry for caregivers that are dealing with the medical community. And I mean, we would literally go from one spot. One doctor would say, get your affairs in order. And literally in the same day, we would go to another doctor and they'd say, oh, you're going to be fine. And you'd just be like, oh,
Yeah, it's
yeah, it's there's no easy way around this. Death, there's no easy way.
yeah.
And there's no perfect way. So you got to give up that.
So in general, how do you feel now at this point, having gone through um, helping other people and then dealing with the grief process yourself? What's your big picture feeling on grief and loss?
Well, there's a couple things. One of which is if you are a person that deals with other people going through grief, it's really important to, if you have just experienced ending of something, a grief, that you allow yourself time. There was 2 instances right after Michael died that people reached out to me and wanted me to work with, and whew, it was super, it was super hard. So I would say, if you are a person that that guides people to let go of grief and embrace it and all that kind of stuff. Embrace it and let go of it. To give yourself time if you have experienced a grief. They say you should take a year before you go back into working with grief. So that was number one. Number two, I really, the big takeaway is you don't have to fear it. It's just a process. And there's no right way of going through it. And I really, really recommend befriending grief, just bringing it in and exploring it and welcoming it. And then when it's not welcomed anymore, you'll know it instinctually. You'll just let it go. And that's where, I remember thinking, is there ever going to be a day that I don't cry about this? And then I remember catching myself. I'm like, oh my God, I went to bed and I'm like, I didn't cry once today. And then that stretched out. And I believe, because I made that commitment to myself early on, I was going to allow myself to go through this process, whether it made people feel uncomfortable or not. And I just committed to that. And, now it's been about almost 2.5 years. And, sure, I miss him, but I don't, it's not raw. It's not, and it's not like if someone talks about him that, the scab is ripped off. Every time if I see pictures of people tag me on Facebook, I get a little bit of a pang. And it's more of like, I wonder if he knew he was dying then. I mean, did he know? So you get that questioning. But so that would be my big takeaway, is like, embrace it, befriend it. Grief is just another, I don't know if grief is really an emotion. It's a process, I think. And there's a lot.
I think it's more of a process that has a lot of different emotions.
Yeah. It shows up, it has different masks it wears, right? And so whatever mask it's wearing for that particular moment, wear it and learn from it. Invite it in, ask, what's the message, what's the learning for this? And then you can let it go. Yeah.
Well, this is the time a lot of people are having to confront and
for sure,
deal with grief now. So I want to thank you for coming on and talking about this. As I told you originally, it's and you said it at the beginning too, it's not a topic that a lot of people feel comfortable with, yet it's one that almost everybody has to deal with at some point.
Right. And if we don't talk about it, how can we find ways to deal with it?
Yes, exactly.
Well, thank you, Kate, for having me on.
Yes, and I want to thank the audience for being here today and listening. Before we move on, I want to also ask Sandra to, how can people get a hold of you if they want to?
Sure. So you can get a hold of me at thrivelearningcollective.com. And there's a contact me page, and you can just contact if you have questions about grief, and you want to get some feedback on that. Feel free to do that. And then we have a Facebook page, Thrive Learning Collective, and so if you want to get on that. So we have different practitioners that we offer on Thrive Learning Collective too. So if you have a loss that you haven't really processed and you'd like to have someone process, certainly contact me or any one of the practitioners that have been trained by me, and they will know how to do that process as well, the grief process.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Kate.
Okay, so I have a couple of thoughts to share with you to carry with you through your week. One is a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. And that, of course, is from Ecclesiastes. And then there's a promise and beauty in so many things if we are open to it. Even through the darkest moment, we try and see the light. There is promise in this as well. And that was said by Natalie Rocco. So thank you for listening today. We have another great show planned for next week. I'll be talking with Davina Lyons, and we'll be talking about authenticity. So tune in next Tuesday, 3 p.m., and I'll just say bye for now.
Thank you for listening to Soul Fire Wisdom with Kate Olson. We hope you enjoyed the show. If we made you laugh, brightened your day, or sparked a new thought, we have succeeded in our mission. Join us next time when we'll share more secrets and truths and all the magic of transformation that is the journey to Soul Fire Wisdom. Always remember, be fierce in the pursuit of what sets your soul on fire.